welcome to the On the Whistle podcast. My name is Alasdair Howorth. I'm the host today, and we've got a great one for you today. Red cards, brilliant goals, incredible atmospheres, some less so good atmospheres, as well as some cracking football. The CAF Champions League is back. We're at the semi-final stage. We've had our two semi-finals played this weekend. There's been a lot to talk about. We're going to get going, diving into it. And alongside me today, we've got our resident football expert, Courtney. Am I allowed to call you a football expert at this stage? How are you doing, brother?
I think that's the only way you can refer to me.
The only thing you should be referred to as.
I'm a football expert that has done very little in football, like we all have. Yes. It's lovely to be here today. It's good to see you, and congratulations on your 7-year-old.
7-week-old. I'm not that. It's not.
7-week-old. 7-week-old, even make it. What? So hold on. I wish you more hours of sleep then.
Welcome along. Courtney's jumped me a bit there, but Maher Mezahi, welcome along to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing good. As Courtney mentioned, I have a newborn at home, so kind of all over the place. But I'm very happy. I think that's the most important thing, and enjoying the football that's being played as well.
And I mean, it's impressive because, if I haven't had kids, but I imagine if and when I do, when I'm 7 weeks along, I will not be doing anything. I'll just be exhausted and grumpy. But somehow you've managed to squeeze in an interview with one of the coaches involved, probably the most exciting coach on the continent right now, Coach Rulani Mokwena. We're trying to get him on the podcast. We'll get him. Don't worry. Maher beat us to it, but we'll get him. But you spoke to him. You did an interview for Al Jazeera, as well as speaking to a few other guys around him. What is Rulani like when you speak to him, when you interview him?
Well, I should say that I did a lot of research for the interview. I had like 2 or 3 days, and most of those 2-3 days, while I was holding my newborn, up late at night, I was watching everything there was to watch on YouTube. All the interviews he did with Robert Marawa, a fella named Luyolo, who has a YouTube show that I quite like, where they talk tactics as well. And I've noticed in all of those shows, that all those interviews before that, he was very introspective. He thinks a lot about the answers that he gives. Not your typical football speak that you'll get, from your run-of-the-mill player that says, yeah, it was a great game and we're going to try better next week. He really thinks about what he's saying. And I found that to be the case when I was interviewing him as well. Initially, I'd asked for 15, 20 minutes, and we actually went more than, I think, an hour. I think he was still at the facility. It seemed like we did it it seems like he was in the change room somewhere in Pretoria. They were getting ready to go to Morocco, but we just connected on that level where we had a deep discussion about football and about life in general. And it seemed like he really liked that kind of conversation. So an impressive person as well as an impressive coach.
And I mean, when you look at the person he is, how impressive he is, that speaks for itself. When you look at the football Mamelodi Sundowns have played this season, they've been, in my opinion, the best team to watch on the continent. One of the best teams to watch around the world in terms of the tactics, the football, the style of football. But we'll get more into that as we review the games. Before we crack on into it, on Friday night, Ahly traveled to Tunisia to play Esperance in the first semi-final, and as always seems to be the case these days, Ahly came away with the goods. When it comes to Champions League, doesn't matter how much they struggle in the group stages, whether they're one penalty away from being knocked out, they still managed to find a way to the final. 3 goals, Percy Tau grabbing 2, Calabria scoring the other, and Ahly looking confident. But then the big game was the one last night, where Rulani and the Sundowns traveled up to Morocco to face Wydad Casablanca, holders of the competition. Wydad Casablanca at home in that cauldron-like atmosphere at the Mohammed Sank. And the game finished 0-0, but that is very much not tell the whole story, because it was an action-packed game. And kind of coming into this game, what were you expecting, Maher, and kind of how did that play out on the pitch in terms of the way Sundowns approached it?
I think it was pretty similar to what I was expecting. First of all, I didn't know what to expect from Wydad because they had a coaching change last week. They got rid of Garrido and they brought in Sven Vanderbroek, who I think we kind of know on the continent, Hugo Bruce's former assistant during his time at Cameroon. So I didn't really know how he would attack. You only have 1 week. I mean, what kind of game plan can you implement with your players in a week's time? So I didn't really know what to expect from Wydad. But from Sundowns, I expected them to, even though they're playing away from home, to monopolize possession. I didn't look at the full-time statistics, but I know in the first half they had the lion's share of possession. So they did hold on the ball. And what I noticed is that Wydad was letting, especially their defenders and Rano and Williams, they were letting them have the ball. They really started pressing and applying pressure around midfield. So they were okay with Sundowns holding the ball as long as it was far away from the pitch, which I thought was an okay tactic from Wydad. But I thought Sundowns were the better side. They created the better chances. But the one question I had with Mokwena, actually, even during my interview, I asked him this is, I know when it comes to X's and O's and predetermined game plans, I know that you're going to outdo, 9 out of 10 coaches, maybe even more than that. Very, very difficult to beat you in terms of tactics. But when it comes to you being a 36-year-old, taking a squad of players to the other side of the continent, playing in that atmosphere, football is not just X's and O's. It's also, as Courtney will tell you, it's the pressure from the supporters. It's handling nerves. How do you manage that psychologically? That's what I was most curious to see. And the fact that they had 2 sendings off, I thought was a little unlucky. But I was curious to see how they managed that in the second half. And I think that was a good test for Mokwena. I thought they did a decent job staving off Wydad attacks. And I think they'll be okay with a 0-0 away from home, going back to Pretoria.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Courtney, it's very rare that we see a team travel to Wydad, travel to Casablanca, even to play Raja and dominate a game in the way Sundowns did. And yeah, what struck me was, they in the first half, it looked like they were playing for the 0-0, just controlling the game, not over kind of pushing things. Peter Shalulile had a goal disallowed for offsides, but Sundowns weren't creating much, but they looked so comfortable. And what struck me is Neo Maema, who's so important to the Sundowns team, so important to keeping things ticking in that midfield where they dominate the ball, gets sent off. First of all,
was it justified for you?
Huh? Well, yeah, that's what I'm first gonna ask.
No.
Courtney, what were your thoughts on that red card?
First, before we go to the red card, right? Let's just go back to something that we spoke about a bit earlier. What an advert for a game! Look at the scenery. Look at the stadium. Just look at, I just felt proud as an African to be able to look at that and think to myself, my goodness gracious, we're putting on such a showpiece. Where's the rest of the world watching this? It just looks beautiful. In the eve of the night, the stadium and the supporters, beautiful. And a game of that magnitude deserved that. Let's start there. The red card, no. I didn't think it was a red card. But decisions get made. What can you do? Mistakes get made. I don't know. Something that Maher spoke a bit quite confidently about earlier on is Sundowns dominated the game. They looked in total control. But I also feel that it was a form of managing the play from the other side as well, allowing them to have the ball, just allowing them. There were no threat in defensive positions where they've had the ball. But the first red card, I don't think it was. The second red card, you can't actually count. 95th minute, you're not really worried about it. It's not going to affect the game of play. The game is shut down. The game's over. But he's lost 2. He's got 2 red cards. 0-0 away from home in a huge atmosphere and nerves and a crowd of that magnitude. Now they're going to come back to Pretoria. They won't have a crowd of that size. They definitely won't. They won't have that juggernaut atmosphere. So it won't be filled out the stadium like it was in Casablanca. It was just, I loved watching the supporters. I looked into the crowds and I was seeing the fathers with their children, and it was such a good atmosphere. I was just proud to watch it.
Absolutely, and I think we should also shout out other places. The last couple of weeks, we've seen incredible atmospheres, whether it's in Argentina, kind of in the Super Classico, whether it's in the AFC Champions League final. Both Al Hilal and Urawa put on some incredible tifos and incredible atmospheres, and it's brilliant that we're seeing it come back to us. But I mean, that what I found so interesting about this game, Maher, was that usually we see that red card as an inflection point. Usually, if I'm writing a match report, I'm like Sundowns complete control. And then the tie got flipped on its head, when Neo Maema kind of comes in on that challenge. But nothing seemed to change. Yeah, Wydad had a couple chances, but they still were only coming from set pieces or kind of Sundowns mistakes. And even Shalulile almost scored that spectacular goal. How did Mokwena kind of manage that? How did Sundowns manage what must have been such a tough position?
I think Wydad, and I'm sorry to jump in here, I think Wydad helped him manage it because there was no real gegenpress from them. You know, they were very relaxed in their approach to play. Yes, set piece wise, absolutely. So he could almost keep the same formation that he currently had because he didn't need to. He wasn't being put under that intense pressure by the opponents. Um, Now another manager at a particular time could have thought, no, 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 I'm making a sub. I'm putting on another attacker. I'm creating a bit more penetration in midfield and offensively. The coach didn't do that, and it comes back to I think something that you mentioned, Alistair. I may be wrong. How many weeks has this coach of Wydad been in post? 1 week. Don't know the players. Maybe doesn't know anything at the moment. Getting used to it, up and running, it's taking him a bit of time.
Absolutely. And just on that point quickly, I know a lot of Wydad supporters were disappointed with the lineup, especially some of the defenders, Abul Fatouh being a starter. And you could see that when he included, I'm not going to say better defenders, but more attacking fullbacks towards the end of the match, some of the crosses that Wydad were putting in gave Sundowns a little bit of trouble, especially the Algerian fullback, Hussein bin Ayada. So perhaps, yeah, the coach being familiar with the team affected them. But I do think, to go back to Esperance as well, I think Esperance and Wydad, throughout this tournament, I've been watching them from the group stages, they've lacked a little something in attack. It isn't the same Wydad side that we watched, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And it isn't the same Esperance side of 2-3 years ago as well. I think it's quite clear to anybody that's been watching the Champions League this year that Sundowns, Raja Casablanca a little bit, they had great results in the group stage, even though admittedly it was a weak group stage. But Sundowns and Ahly have been the two for me. And Ahly, after a rough start, have been the two sides to look out for. And just a final point, one tip of the hat to Mokwena is that, as you mentioned, the sending off happened, I think, right before halftime. The first 10 minutes, especially coming into the second half, is when Sundowns looked the best in the second half. So again, for me, that's a mark of a strong coach is, okay, you had the chance to speak to your players. How are they going to react in those first 10 minutes? And people know that, the first 10 minutes of the half and the last 10 minutes of the half are very, very strategically important times of the match. So Sundowns were quite good in the first 10 minutes of the second half.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all of that. What's really struck me about Wydad this season, I remember watching them at the Club World Cup when I was in Morocco. They just really struggle for that goal threat. They really struggle to score goals. Both Lamkelzee and Sambu just don't do it for me. They're big target men. They offer a lot in that sense, but they don't offer goals. And even, you look back to last year, like, even in that game, the final, when they playing Al Ahly,
it's a wonder goal.
Yeah, exactly. They had everything going for them. They had all the controversy playing at home. They had the stands full. And yet even then they needed a screamer from El Mutraji to take the lead. For me, that's been their kind of real struggle to have those goal scorers. Whereas you look at Sundowns, they have, what struck me was, Sundowns are playing this neat, tidy football, but, their best chance when they score is just, a bit of a ball over the top. Shalilule latches onto it, kind of finishes. They have that option and they have a ruthless goal scorer. Same with, Al Ahly, when you have Karabra, you have Tau, you have, all sorts, but I feel like, Wydad missed that, and that's what hurts them. I mean, for you, Maher, how much hope do you give them going away from home? They have to compete in Sundowns' backyard, where Sundowns have been kind of supreme.
Sundowns have one problem, is that away goals still count in the CAF Champions League. And 0-0 is not the worst scoreline in the world for Wydad, because if they score 1 goal in South Africa, Sundowns are going to have to score 2. Which I'm not saying they can't. They can do that, but that's what gives me a little more hope for Wydad. I still think Sundowns are favorites, but the fact that Wydad can sit back and absorb pressure, we know they can defend. We have some doubts about their attacking. They can absorb pressure, and perhaps, anything can happen. They can score on a set piece. They can score on a counterattack. That's what gives me a little bit of hope for them. But I still think Sundowns are slight favorites.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the game is so well teed up now for next weekend for what will be an excellent game. As we move on to the other, it's slightly less so. Esperance losing at home 3-0 to Al Ahly. Obviously, Esperance playing in front of no one and in front of an empty stadium after they had, they were given sanctions by CAF for kind of some terrible scenes that we saw in the previous game.
There was a guy with a chainsaw in the stand. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
goes with a chainsaw. I just like to think now. So forget the chaos that we've seen at stadiums before. Seats being ripped out. Who thinks I need a chainsaw?
Well, apparently it was in it belonged to the gardener or the groundskeeper. He had a room that they broke into, and then they grabbed it from there. Yeah, so he didn't actually go to the stadium with the chainsaw, if that's mitigating.
I want to know what the groundsman's doing with
Yeah,
a
what's he
chainsaw.
doing? Yeah, I don't know.
What's he doing with a chainsaw?
Maybe he's trimming trees outside of the ground. I don't know, but yeah.
I mean, Courtney, I'll come to you first. You know, this Al Ahly side, one thing that struck me is you know, our boy Percy Tau. You know, he's had such a difficult career in many ways. The way he went to Europe, it didn't work out. He came back to Al Ahly. There's been a lot of pressure on him. But this season, you know, in the Champions League, 4 goals, 4 assists. You know, nobody's got a better goals and assist return. Is he now actually starting to hit the heights that kind of were promised and haven't been quite fulfilled since he left Sundowns all those years ago?
Well, hopefully for him, Alasdair, his recent form shows that. Yes, he suffered with some terrible injuries, and then also he suffered with the grey cloud of Pizzo leaving and people thinking that he's going to go as well, which didn't happen. He stayed on, and well done to him for staying on at the club. 2 goals yesterday. Firstly, let me just say, nobody should lose 3-0 in the first leg of a semi-final. It's almost unheard of. You don't have Messi in your team. You really should never lose 3-0. And I'm also going to say, and I think, Maher, you just said that, at home 3-0. For goodness sake, what is going on? So I'll actually walk into the final, I think, undisturbed. Percy Tau is just improving his reputation up north. That, you know, I thought he was a world-class player. I didn't think he was given a fair shake at Brighton, if I'm being very honest. He wasn't. The manager played him in one big game against Man City and then hardly played him afterwards.
You won't find many people disagreeing with you here, Courtney. I was the same. I had so much hope.
I'm happy for him. I'm happy for his form that he's currently struck. And you must remember, big players hit big time at the right moments. And this is where he is. Semi-final, 2 goals. Sundowns will be worried looking at that, because I know Rulani Mokwena will be looking at his fixture coming up, and he'll also have a delegation of people looking at potentially the next fixture. Percy Tau is in form. There's a problem there.
Look, even though Al Ahly were clearly the better side and Esperance very rarely troubled them, Esperance had the lion's share of the ball in that game, and Percy was doing a lot of defending, and I hadn't seen him really. I wasn't expecting him to be that influential in that match, while he was going to spend the majority of the time defending well, I thought. So the fact that he was able to do that on the right side of the flank and then also score 2 goals. And my God, that second goal, I mean, wow. So yeah, hats off, definitely.
And for me, that was a vintage Percy Tau goal. That was us seeing him at his best, you know, using his pace to get ahead, get the ball, but they kind of, in a very hopeless situation, kind of jinx past 3 or 4 players, fake shot, and then rifles at home. But I mean,
terrible defending.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is this is the one thing that struck me about Esperance, is the defending was so lackadaisical. You know, even the first goal, just the ease at which Al Ahly opened them up. Yeah, even the chance that Percy Tau should have gotten an assist when he played through Karab, like it was simple football. You know, it wasn't sophisticated football by Al Ahly, but it carved Esperance open.
The one thing if we're gonna give, you know, Esperance if we're going to give them any leeway, they've had a very, very congested fixture list over the last 3 weeks, and they suffered some pretty significant injuries, especially on the attacking side of the pitch. So their left winger, the Libyan international Hamdi El Houni, who's probably been their best player over the last 2 years, he's been out for the last 3-4 weeks. Their Algerian striker Riyad Ben Ayad just done his cruciate ligaments, I think 2 weeks ago as well, and they could have used his goal scoring threat. The goalkeeper is usually Muaz Ben Sharifia, and they brought in Debshi, and he was obviously at fault for the first goal. So I think there was a combination of 3 things: the fact that they didn't have the supporters at home, and the fact that, you know, CAF came down hard on them. I think that maybe played psychologically on them. The fact that they had a lot of injuries and a pretty significant congested fixture list. I think those 3 things. But even then, give me all the mitigating circumstances as you want. Like Courtney says, you cannot lose 3-0 in the first leg of a semi-final. There's no excuses for that. Absolutely none.
And
at home.
Yeah, I think that's the wildest thing. And I think, but in previous seasons, what we've seen is their capacity, Esperance, when they don't play well, is to still find goals from places. You know, players like, you know, Mohamed Ben Ramdan, you know, scoring when you don't expect them to. But there was just none of that. And I think that's what surprised me. And clearly surprised the Esperance kind of hierarchy, because Nabil Malul, after the game, handed in his resignation. You know, another day, another North African coach leaving his post. I mean, it's the way things work.
I'll say this to you, right? It was a game that I think managers should be handing in their resignation. I think Al Ahly were all over them. Esperance were not in that game. I just felt I, I I didn't feel they were. Sometimes this is a semi-final of the Champions League, right? You are at home. You've got to put up more of an active fight. I just felt that they stood off Al Ahly firstly, allowed them a lot of time on the ball. I just didn't feel that there was enough combativeness between the players to try and stop them. And if you look at Percy Tau's second goal, he goes, he fakes, stops. There's two defenders. They both stop. Then he goes, he fakes again. They stop. They both. Hold on. Get close. Put the tackle in. He's on his left foot. He can only score with his left foot. You can almost hear the analyst. You're sitting in a studio. Well, from this point, he can only score with his left foot. So protect the left foot. There's two of you. One go a bit forward. One stand a bit off. They were just asleep. Asleep. Just not good enough. Honestly, the manager's got to pack up. Go and play in the Motsepe League. I'll take over the job with no effort and do better.
and again, we've spoken, Maher, about how the injuries up front have hurt them. Defensively, these are good defenders. These are top senior pros. You think about Tugai, Maria, Ben Hamida. These guys, they're not kind of new to this scene. They're not jokers. But before we move on, I'll give you a last word, Maher, on Al Ahly. You were saying that they stumbled through the group stage of the Champions League, which they very, very much did. But is this them now kind of going through the gears, being the Al Ahly we kind of all know and hate or love, coming into the business end of the Champions League? Because I think, if I'm not wrong, this will be a fourth consecutive Champions League final that they qualify for.
When did Pizzo leave Al Ahly? Was it at the beginning of this Champions League campaign? If I'm not mistaken.
It 2 years? It might have been. Year?
I think it was towards the end of last season. I don't think it was between seasons.
I do believe that this coach didn't have that much time to prepare. Yeah, and I think they had. Speaking of congested fixture list, if I'm not mistaken, there was something. I don't know if it was the Club World Cup or what the case was, but I remember before the group stages, I remember them missing players. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't the Chan, but it was something there. So they got off to a rocky start, as you mentioned. Losing to Sundowns. That was a very significant result. Yeah, 5-2. And then I believe they also lost to Al Hilal from Sudan. But yeah, since then they had the transfer window. They brought in some reinforcements, and I think the coach really got a hang of his team, and they look like they're organized now. And when you just look at players on paper, I think Sundowns have a great squad, but I do think Al Ahly squad is a little bit better. So I think Sundowns have the better coaching, maybe the better chemistry. But I do think on paper, Al Ahly not only have the experience, but they have the better players on paper. So it's going to be, those are my two picks for the final. I think it's going to be a great final.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, yeah, when you go through that Al Ahly side, even with injuries, with struggles, like it is unbelievable the riches they have. The amount.
Ali Malul, Aliou Dieng, El Shahat, Percy Tau. Easily. El Shenawi, these guys could easily be playing European football.
Absolutely.
Easily.
Yeah, and even like Mohamed Abdul Monem, who came through at the AFCON last year, has been one of the best centre backs on the continent.
Yeah.
So I think you won't find many disagreements here in terms of they'll be in the final. I think Sundowns will as well. But obviously it's still 0-0. With that, still kind of have it in their genes to get through. But I think the big difference for that one as well, coming back to that, is also just the difference in their league positions and where the pressure is. Sundowns have been PSL champions for the last 2 months. Mathematically, it was a couple games ago. Whereas Wydad, the reason why they sacked them was it Garrido, is because they're struggling in Botola Pro. Asfar Rabat have done so well this season and are pushing them. Raja aren't that far behind. So I think that plays onto it. But
sorry, Alasdair.
Oh, sorry, Courtney.
I just want to make a point here. I think Sundowns' success domestically is going to catch up with them and be Sundowns' downfall. Because what Sundowns are doing in terms of the market here in South Africa is that they're just buying all the best players. And they equipping themselves. Yes. So basically, they're making the league not competitive because all the competitors are with them. So anybody else that's not in the league, it's just down to good managers that the players are really fighting. But the top quality players are all at Sundowns. And
similar to Bayern Munich
Yeah, the big hitters. The big hitters today. Now, Al Ahly don't have that. Al Ahly have competition. They've got obstacles, similar type of juggernauts. So they've got a pedigree of week in, week out playing hard on the competition and in the domestic league. Sundowns don't have that. Sundowns have won the league, I think, what's it, 7 or 8 games ago?
Yeah, 7. And as well as it's what 6 titles in a row now,
Yeah.
and
So
it'll be a long time before we can even envisage one of the other two Soweto the two Soweto Giants catching them.
No one's going to challenge them. No one's going to challenge you. But what does that give you? That gives you are now going into games undercooked, where you should be getting tested at the top end of the spectrum. Because you must remember, Al Ahly are not a small team. They're going to come into this competition if they get to the final, and we're talking possibilities here. There could be a James Buster Douglas situation in the next game that we're down. So don't ever forget that. Don't forget that. So let's not say Sundowns are through yet, but if they get through, I think I'll actually take the tournament. I really do. I think they take the cup.
And that's one thing I found really interesting about your piece, Maher, when you're interviewing Mokwena, is you asked him about this kind of how do you deal with the intangibles and how do you deal with kind of these things that you can't control in terms of the atmosphere playing against teams with such pedigree. And I found his answer so interesting, where he's talking about he can't simulate the atmosphere of the supporters, but he can still try and put his players under the same kind of emotional stress. What was that about? What was he getting at when he was talking about that?
What he was getting at is, because I had actually, when I was asking the question, I was referring to North American sports as well. I made 2 examples. There's a former basketball player named Reggie Miller, who used to pay somebody, one of his assistants, to scream in his face and insult him while he was shooting before the game, to try and make sure that he was psychologically prepared. And the other one was in North American football. They actually pump crowd noise into training sessions so that they can familiarize themselves with hand signals when they can't hear themselves because of how loud it is in the stadium. And I was telling him, you're going to go in, it's going to be a similar atmosphere in Riyadh. I went to Mohammed V Stadium for the final last year. I know I gave 30 or 40% of that result last year in the final to the crowd.
Absolutely.
And what he was saying was that he actually saw the same thing, Mikel Arteta do the same thing before their trip to Anfield, he said. So he had that in mind already. But what he was saying was that he couldn't really do that, but the way he would try to simulate pressure is that he would make training extremely hard in terms of working his players harder than ever, in terms of even in terms of doing drills, overloading them basically with the difficulty, the level of difficulty he said, I want to make training hard so that the game will be easier. So I appreciated the fact that he was understanding that there's going to be a psychological element to going to play over there in Morocco. It's not just going to be about the X's and O's. Because like I said, Mokwena, when it comes to if football was Football Manager and we could just line up all of our tactics like this and simulate the game, and he's going to win every single match. Yeah. But look at managers like Ancelotti, like Zidane, like Mourinho. I mean, they're not maybe the strongest tacticians, especially the first two, Ancelotti and Zidane, but they get their players to play for them. That's one thing I was wondering with Mokwena is okay, you're 36 years old, you're a young coach. Can you get the players to play for you? Can you motivate them psychologically? How do you handle the intangibles? That's where I wanted to see what he had in mind.
And I mean, it's incredible to hear that. And we've seen that's oftentimes where Sundowns have been let down over the last few years, is when they go to these North African kind of clubs and struggle with the big atmosphere.
Sorry to cut you off, Alasdair. And one of the reasons why I said that, I told you, I watched interviews of him before when he said, one of the reasons why I think Sundowns have struggled to win a Champions League title since 2016 is because the atmospheres they generate abroad are better than the atmospheres they generate at home, which is something that Courtney was hinting at before. So he was very acutely aware of that situation.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say that to you, Courtney. You're never is any Sundowns game in the PSL ever gonna get that atmosphere? The only game I can think would be the Soweto Derby. So I can't imagine the Sundowns game ever getting that.
Alasdair, you've got to remember, firstly, you've got to think of where is Sundowns actually in terms of location situated. Blue Bulls country, Currie Cup finalists every year, big team, big rugby team. Pretoria, capital of the country, very, very anti-football, if I could use that. So the stadium's never going to be full. It's not going to. What Sundowns should be doing with the backing that they have is go back to a stadium that was a football stadium for them. That's what I'd be looking to do. Or so their supporters, because at the moment they're never going to fill the crowd. If I'm the Wydad manager at this moment in time, yes, I've only been in job 1 week. I'm looking at that and saying, you know what, guys, we're not going to face what we provided this weekend there. It's a 50-50 game again. Let's get out there. Let's get out there. We can get into these guys. They are a top team. No, let's not disrespect the ability, but they don't have a backing of a crowd like we had on the weekend yet. So that's actually an advantage. We don't have this. So I think in that case, Sundowns are a bit behind. I think that's something they need to improve on. I spoke very descriptively of what I saw in Casablanca at the beginning of the pod. Wow, you could have put that atmosphere anywhere in world football and it would have been respected. Anywhere, I'm trying to remember what the sign said. Maher, can you remember what the sign said?
With the Tifo, I missed it.
I think the sign said, and please correct me if I think it said a great place to die.
Yeah, if that would intimidate you, I don't know what will.
I just thought to myself, wow, you go back in the days of when Man United used to go out to Fenerbahce, and when the signs used to be up, welcome to hell.
Welcome to hell.
Atmosphere. Yeah. You're gonna go out to South Africa. It's gonna be nice. It'll be plush. It won't be full.
And even if that doesn't affect the players, that kind of atmosphere, sometimes it can affect the referee, the match official. Maybe the Mayema is not a red card. If he doesn't hear the whistles and he feels like I'm under pressure some way somehow.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Sundowns are not the only South African team in continental competition. We also have Marumo Gallants, who are in the Confederations Cup semi-finals. We've had Dylan Kerr on.
Is this a surprise in South Africa?
Mate, it is an unbelievable surprise. It's like at the 100-meter Olympic final, somebody challenging Usain Bolt and almost beating him. That's what it is. It's unbelievable. It's I can't believe they did.
Yeah, we've had, so the last couple of weeks we've spoken a lot about Gallants. We had Lawrence Kohler come on to talk about them, who is speaking about how this is a team full of rejects, battling relegation, potentially still might be relegated, and as well as then we've had Coach Steve Kerr come on to talk to us about how things have gone since he's come in. Obviously, he's not been able to be the manager on the pitch. He's had to be a consultant due to visa issues, and so he's had to be oftentimes not even on the touchline dealing with these kind of issues. Meanwhile, Gallants have risen, kind of beaten some of the best teams in the tournament, beating Pyramids, which is an incredible result. I think Pyramids, for my money, would have been one of the favorites along with Asfar Rabat coming into it. Then they've now come up against the new boys on the block, young Africans, the newest kind of country on the block in terms of continental football, Tanzania. And they came up against Yanga. Courtney, we were saying that, you weren't super impressed by Yanga, but they got the job done in terms of beating Gallants 2-0.
Listen, yes, they did. They firstly, Dylan was absolutely livid, if I must be very honest, after the first leg. He was. In fact, he was so livid that late that night, I think in his analysis, he sent me the clips of the analysis of how they dominated the game and said, I must start to share this out. And looking at the game, they had so many clear-cut chances, which makes him hopeful for the second leg. But what you got to look at is what the other team provided at the moment. Yes, they were under pressure, but they came away with a 2-0 victory. They've got the goals in their bag. They are ahead at this point in time. So the second leg being in South Africa, the same problems that I spoke about in terms of Sundowns and support. There won't be a capacity crowd in any way, shape, or form. Even though the gates will be open and they'll be allowed in for free, they won't be. But I just hope Marumo would, as Dylan said, a team of people nobody really wanted in South Africa. The team is patched together. I hope they get the job done.
I mean, first of all, I think I referred to him as Steve Kerr. I think Maher's confused me when speaking about American sports. Yeah, I'm mixing him up with Steve Kerr.
Well, I tell you something. Steve Kerr's doing a similar type of job in the basketball league.
I think
very good coach.
He's slightly more resources than Dylan at
well,
Gallants.
yeah, he did.
But Maher, I mean, in terms of, I was alluding a bit to kind of Yanga as being the new kids on the block. They have also gone and won Liga Kubara. They're a record-setting, I think, is it 27th, 29th title to seal the league ahead of Simba. We hear a lot of noise, and I speak to a lot of particularly South Africans who are fed up with all the noise we hear online from Tanzanian fans. They're a big bunch coming in, and Simba and Yanga are making a lot of noise, is doing a lot of good things in terms of building their brands, building their clubs. And but we haven't quite seen them step to the highest stage. We saw Simba come close when they got to the quarterfinals a couple of years ago, beat Ahly at home. But, is Yanga getting to the semi-finals, potentially getting to the final, and probably the favorites in the final? Is this kind of the Tanzanian guys finally making that step to say, actually, we have that pedigree, we have the capacity to play against the big guys?
It's a good question, and I'm going to be completely honest. I haven't watched too much of Simba or Yanga. I've just watched highlights from afar this year. But my main observation is that even from speaking to Tanzanians, Simba's success over the last 5 years has been due to the administration and the amount of money they pump into the club and how professional it is. Whereas Yanga's very recent success is mostly due to their coach, the Tunisian coach Nabi, who many people would probably put alongside Mokwena as one of the coaches of the year in African football. Tunisia in general exports, I think, the most coaches per capita out of any other African nation. They do a great job, especially the physical, in terms of physical preparation, recovery. They really are some of the best. So you'll have a lot of teams all over the continent hiring Tunisian coaches for before and after the match. And Nabi's no different. So his sides are typically well organized, and they'll always be physically fit. That said, one other remark I'll make about Tanzanian football in general is that I've just been so impressed seeing. I mean, everybody knew that they're a passionate country about football. I mean, you just post one thing on Twitter and you're going to be invaded by their replies. But just seeing highlights of their league, I watched when they scored their goal. Mudathir Yahya scored the goal last week to win Yanga the title. I mean, we talk about SA maybe lacking some atmosphere in the stadiums. Tanzania is completely on the other end of the spectrum, and what they've done over the last decade, really, in terms of, first of all, they have street football, the biggest street football tournaments in all of Africa. They're like the Ndondo Cup, it's called, where you get players from 17 to 23, and you get tens of thousands of people attending these street football tournaments. You have things like, the big clubs like Simba, they have something called Simba Day, before the season starts, where they'll, promote the club, and they'll sell a bunch of merchandise. And, people have their phone subscriptions are linked to their club. They have streaming services, streaming every match in the Tanzanian league. People are paying $8, $9 a month instead of a blue check on Twitter. So really, I've been so impressed with Tanzania in general and the way their football has developed over the last 10 years. And I think it's not necessarily because of great governance, but it's just because of the passion that the people over there have for football.
Yeah, I think we need to give a lot of credit to Azam who run the whole thing. I mean, yeah, I can watch some of the games, just streaming on my phone or on my computer. And they as a Kenyan, I take no pride in saying this, but they're doing us dirty, because even this weekend, for the first time, you could watch. We had the Mashemeji derby, the biggest derby in Kenya, which again 30, 40, 50 years ago between AFC Leopards and Gor Mahia would be one of the biggest games on the continent. You'd be tens of thousands of fans. And, Kenya has fallen by the wayside. And now to the point where we have a Tanzanian broadcaster broadcasting our games. And so it's, I take no pleasure in saying that, but they've done it so well. And we're seeing the just rewards in terms of that, in terms of the performance of Yanga and Simba, in terms of the way they've caught up. I mean, especially looking, and as well as for me, what struck me particularly about this Yanga side is the way they can attract players. This for me, oftentimes I say this is not a Tanzanian team, this is a DRC team, because you have players like Fiston Mayele, who are top players in DRC making that move, and even players like Stefan Aziz Ki making the move all the way from is it Burkina Faso all the way to and same with Papesako from Senegal going to Simba. So I think we have to give them a lot of credit. I mean, first of all, Courtney, I just want to ask you: do you think that we Maher's talking about that physicality, and for me that was the difference in that Yanga game is no matter how neat and tidy the football was from Gallants, when they played the ball up to the likes of Mayele, the centre backs couldn't handle him, and that physical side was the difference. Do you give Dylan Kerr any hope of overturning it? 2-0's a difficult lead to turn over.
I didn't give Dylan hope to have so many chances in the first leg, because the easy way to view this game here, Alasdair, is resources against no resources. That's basically it. Dylan was telling us their preparations for this game, they couldn't even get a pitch that they could train on prior to the build-up before they went out and played this game. They didn't. Then they come back to South Africa. They go and play in Pietermaritzburg, my hometown. They don't have a training stadium. They're training at a casino, And then also, I don't need to tell you about the situation where you had coaches being left behind in the stadium because of a bill not being paid. Basically, it is soft chaos. They've got no resources. So when we talk about playing ability and who they're facing, I'll say this to you. They are my James Buster Douglas, as I mentioned a bit earlier. Nobody's giving them a chance. Nobody. All right? They've got absolutely everything against them. They've got a team with a lot of resources. They've got a team that also, if you look at them, physically dominant. There's the other thing I was saying to Dylan, because like I said, early hours of the morning, he sent me, look at how we dominated the game. I'm saying, but set pieces and free kicks, this team, the size of them, you got a problem here, which is taken into account. I still think they go through, man. I don't know why I've got this feeling. The fairy tale is there. It's the pretty woman scenario. Think of the movie. I think they go through. 2-0 down, they still go through.
And I think, as difficult as that is, they've shown that at home they can do it, whether it's against, who they played, Tripoli from Libya in the qualifiers, to playing Pyramids, they've shown that when they bring teams home in front of a terrible crowd, they can still turn it on and do it. I think it'll be a good game. I would have them favorites to win the match. I don't know if I'd have them as favorites to get through. I think Yanga will do it. But in the other semi-final, we had ASEC Mimosa playing USM Alger 0-0 after the first leg in Cote d'Ivoire. Maher, being an Algerian, I was looking at the stats of this game. USM Alger had 0 shots on target with only 3 shots and had 35% possession. ASEC Mimosa absolutely battered them. But having said that, they pulled off an incredible result, knocking out Asfar Rabat in the quarterfinals. How do you think they'll do in that final semi-final and potentially in a final against Yanga or Gallants?
One of the things that has impressed me the most about USM of Algiers has been the kind of grit that they've shown, especially, as you mentioned, that away leg, away to Rabat, who, as you mentioned, were one of the favorites in this tournament early. They do have some very talented defenders, players like Zinedine Bel'aid, players like Saadi Radwani is a great right back, Bouchina, also a good defender. So, you look, in Algeria at the moment, the Algerian league is miles off of what it was 10 years ago. But you have 3 main clubs that, pay their players on time, have great budgets, and are picking up what's left of the talent that's in the Algerian league. One of them is CR Belouizdad, which Sundowns put to the sword quite impressively in the Champions League. And the other 2 are MC of Algiers and USM of Algiers. USM of Algiers are a side that have strong backing from a state enterprise, and they have a good budget, and they have a bunch of really good players. But their main strength is their defense, their goalkeeper, and their striker, Ayman Mahious. Ayman Mahious is, at the Chan, I think he was the leading scorer. He's like a tall point man, scores a lot of penalties, great in the box, very physical as well. So they're perfectly set up to get results away from home. The question now is, now they're going back home. We said away goals count. Can they put ASEC to the sword? We talked about atmospheres in SA. In Algeria, have 40,000 tickets sold out. So they were sold out 3 days ago. They're going to be playing, I believe, in either the Nelson Mandela Stadium or the 5th of July Stadium. I believe it's Nelson Mandela Stadium, and it's going to be a great atmosphere. So I think the fact that they have that going for them and the grit that they've showed, I do think they can get past this really good ASEC side and into the finals. And no shots or anything, but I hope it's against Gallants and not Yanga, because I think going away to Tanzania will be very difficult.
Absolutely. And again, just to pick up on that point, we started this by talking about how brilliant it was to see those atmospheres. We're excited again to see the old format of home and away finals to be brought so we can enjoy those incredible atmospheres. And we cannot wait to see another round of fixtures with full houses, whether it's in Egypt, hopefully in Pretoria, or in Algeria as well. But thank you so much, Maher. Thank you so much, Courtney. If this piqued your interest in terms of listening to the content, there is so much fantastic football, absolute nonsense like chainsaws happening in African football every single week, and we are here to cover it. You can follow us at OTW_podcast. I mean, for instance, you want to hear the absolute travesty, and I don't even know what else to describe it as, a story of the Marumo Gallants having people imprisoned in a hotel in Libya. Go back to listen to our podcast from last week where Dylan Kerr explains what happens, explains the ridiculousness of it. But there's always more to happen on this continent. There's always great stuff to be happening, and we will be covering it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for